So let's talk a little bit about where this is going, and I'm going to try to skirt around spoilers and stuff. There are a couple of concepts in the entire body of work that I want to point to as being, really important to me as a human being, I guess, and as a writer. One of which is that the universe makes sense. Our perception of it, however, is so limited, it looks incredibly chaotic. And I believe religion, for example, and I include the science of religion, or the religion of science, if you will, the adherence to the scientific discipline. These are all attempts in one way or another to formalize and to make sense out of a system that's so vast, and our perception of it is so limited, that it's almost like this desperate sense of human alienation. We really hate mysteries in one sense, which is why we love mystery novels, where at the end of the book you find out who did it. It's like, I think it would be a far better writer than I am who could write a murder mystery where at the end, you go to the last page and the detective goes, damned if I know who did it. Okay, it's a closed case, it's a cold case, put it in the cold case file, and I mean that happens in real life, but you as the reader want nothing to do with that. It would be, I smell a really weird contest coming on. I'm going to talk to a couple of publisher friends of mine. The mystery that has no end. I'll bet you what would happen is if you actually published that, within a week, there'd be, 1,000 emails from readers going, "You moron, don't you realize that the guy in chapter 2 wearing the blue coat was the guy," with these elaborate explanations for why the cops in the book were too dumb to understand, but it was obvious to him as the reader. The amount of speculation I get over things that I know what I'm doing, and they go, well, maybe it's because in another life, Bug pissed off the god of big fat chihuahuas, and therefore, I mean, you just get this amazing stuff. Those of you who are on my mailing list know exactly what I'm talking about, because you get some really random stuff. And my people are absolutely relatively well behaved. You want to hear some batshit stuff, you go hang out with, Anne Rice's fans.
No.
Anyway, so that's one thing. I want to get into exploration of the human longing for systemic knowledge. Without starting my own religion, because I saw what the people who followed after Ron Hubbard did. I mean, he was just a blatant thief. The rest of the people after him were crazy. Also, I wanted to really explore as much as possible over a wide variety of characters. All kinds of really interesting human behavior. As I'm sitting here, I'm realizing that I probably had a bit more redemption than I intended, and not as much a fall from grace as I probably should have included. And I don't know if I can find a character to take the big fall in the next 2 books. I might just throw him in there to average things out a little bit. But seeing as it probably isn't going to drive any plot points, I'm pretty much stuck with what I've done. But the first redemption was Rupert, and I felt pretty good about that because he was young. And I figured, okay, you can screw up a lot, but given the opportunity for redemption, and you honestly realize that this isn't the way to be. Fine, So he cleaned up his act, and he actually did okay, and turned out to be a solid citizen, more or less, as much as a solid citizen as any multi-millionaire big businessman can be. The second one was the one I surprised myself with Casper. I really got to like the character a lot as I was writing him. And by the time I got to the end of Prince of Foxes, King of Foxes. Prince of Foxes was a book by Raphael Sabatini, which I almost borrowed the title for, which is why occasionally I say that. And actually, the fact is there was a lot of borrowing in terms of influence, because basically Casper is Cesare Borgia, without all the murdering and incest with sisters and stuff, and having a following. Interesting family. You talk about the textbook definition of dysfunctional. Those people. Anyway, so getting into the whole mindset of redemption, And I guess to a lesser degree, Amarantha is a bit of a redeemed character, even though he's pretty much a low-level con man rather than a real scoundrel. You know, I'll get to questions in a little bit.
I
Yeah.
was just going to mention Roderick.
You say what?
I was just going to mention Roderick.
Well, you know, Roderick is a guy that I must confess is probably one of my least satisfying characters as an author. Because, you know, I actually talked to a neurologist. I said, look, if the guy's a little bug fuck and you whack him in the head really hard, right before he dies, might he regain sanity? And he said, well, he might. But I'm fine. That's
perfect.
I had a doctor who said he might. That's all I know. He also could have, you know, ordered all little children under 6 boiled alive, but he didn't, you know, so. I don't know. I think that, you know, characters who've fallen, I guess they're in there, but what I do is they tend to have already fallen before you meet them. You know, Sylvia Esterbrook is, you know, like my all-time favorite evil bitch, you know, because I dated her in about 1968. You know, reasonable facsimile thereof. You know, there's a line, you know, I think my friends Glenn and Jeff heard me use it last week that I overheard it. I think it was a thing in a tweet or an email or something that a guy in a bar overheard his buddy use it. He said, "It's the best off-the-wall crazy pickup line he's ever heard a guy ever use." You know, and it goes like this: it's like a guy sees a really beautiful woman, says, "Oh, I can't talk to you," and she goes, "Why not?" And he goes, "I have a rule of thumb: the better looking the woman, the crazier she is, and you must be batshit." And I thought, you know, that is just twisted enough. If it's like the second or third martini, it might work. But ultimately, it's about, you know, looking at the, you know, like I love politics. I'm one of those crazy guys who you know, will look at politics as a spectator sport. You know, I think, for instance, John Boehner's positions on what he's doing in terms of serving his masters and, you know, keeping the crazy lunatics on the ultra right of the Republican Party from, you know, devouring their young. I mean, I admire the fact that he's the guy, you know, on the Sullivan Show, who's, you know, he's like 2 guys at the same time. He's the one who's running around with the stick and the plates, you know, just trying to keep those things from hitting while Khachaturian's saber dance is playing furiously in the background. But at the same time, he's doing it on one of those balance boards, you know, with the ball underneath, you know, so he's really got his work cut out for him. So while I am not a huge fan of a lot of the silly stuff that he says, because the Koch brothers haven't sent me any money, so I'm really not happy sending them money, I really admire the art of the politics, you know, just as, like, you know, there's other stuff going on where I say I'm old, you know, older than most of you. I remember in the days when, you know, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would go have a beer, you know, and then come back and tell their 2 parties what the hell was going to happen, and things got done. And I'm old enough to remember back when Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn would go meet with Republican leadership, you know, and things would get done. You know, and now I just look at this dog and pony show, this 24/7 news cycle where everything's about. So I look at all this behavior, and, you know, the way it relates to what I do as a writer is I say, well, okay, here's a human condition. Let's talk about, okay, the book, Shards of a Broken Crown. I was about to make a leap from Rage of a Demon King to Talon of the Silver Hawk when 2 things happened. One, I realized I owed them a book I didn't have. I mean, I had no idea what this extra book in the contract was going to be. And then I had an idea about, well, I'm leaving Krondor in this absolute just shambles. And then I remember having a discussion with Marv Wolfman, who wrote for years the Teen Titans, and Chris Claremont, who wrote the X-Men, and Julie Schwartz, who was this legendary editor at DC Comics. And you know, it was back when the Comic-Con was small enough that you could sit in one bar and everybody you knew would wander by sooner or later, you know, before it turned into the Frankfurt Book Fair for geeks. And I said, you know, what occurs to me is, you know, if Superman's battling Luthor or the Hulk is going, you know, mental, and half of downtown, you know, New York gets flattened. Who cleans up the mess? And I think, I don't remember whether it was DC or Marvel, but one of them came out with like this 4 or 6 part mini.
Marvel,
like
Damage Control.
Damage Control, yeah. Where it was like, you know, who goes out and cleans up the mess? And I was thinking of that, and suddenly I went, well, who cleans up the mess? And it was like, I wanted to write the first fantasy novel about, okay, after the big war, what happens? And it just unfolded, you know, and it gave me a couple of things I really liked. I had always thought about bringing Jimmy and Dash in, but I didn't have a story for them, you know, James's grandsons, and his son Arutha. And I had several subplots in the entire, you know, Serpent War saga where I couldn't fit them in conveniently. You know, it was a fair amount of Lord James in the first one and the last one, but the son and the grandsons, it was like, other than make them cardboard figures on the wall and just have them, you know, say lines, you know, like, isn't it lovely, I hope the flowers are blooming, you know, whatever. I didn't have any story elements for them, but they really plugged in nicely into Shards. And it gave me a chance, I really like that book for a lot of reasons, even though it's dramatically one of the least, you know, majestic. It's, you know, the lowest special effects budget of all my books. It didn't blow up a city, you know, anything like that. But it was the fact that I had a guy like Arutha who, you know, his father is just this incredibly powerful person who's done heroic things on both senses of the word heroic. I mean, as a legendary character, and also just magnificent management skills, you know, and able to, you know, basically run the kingdom no matter how incompetent the king might be, you know. And of course the king wasn't. I mean, you know, Liam wasn't, and Boric was pretty good. But, you know, after that it was kind of, okay, not so good. So he's that guy. And Arutha is named after, you know, this legendary character who he's the namesake. And what kind of burden that puts on a guy who is pretty damn competent and really a nice guy and got a really decent skill set. But he's not, you know, magnificent the way. And so I set that whole up for he go out and get himself killed by just trying to live up to the image. And I didn't want to beat that one to death. I wanted to kind of slip it in and have it happen and have the reader kind of go, oh, that sucks. You know, and then reflect on the futility of trying to be more than you are.